My. It's been quite a while since we graded an E3 considering a certain something happened last year that prevented it. Well, before we get right into it, we're not going to be comparing this to 2019 because the structure is too different, so instead, I'll be grading each presentation as they are given, and giving E3 2021 its own rating. So, let's get started with the first conference of the extended weekend, Summer Game Fest. Well, first things first, I'm already popping off at the first game. Wonderlands is a high fantasy version of Borderlands starring Tiny Tina with an all-star cast. This version of Borderlands will include customizable characters and spellcasting, and I am coming at the thought of this. What a fucking amazing start. Next up, they got Metal Slug Tactics, a tactical RPG version of Metal Slug. I've never played the Metal Slug series myself, but this looks fucking phenomenal, and I am a sucker for animated cutscenes like this. Expect nothing less from SNK. Next up, the man, the myth, the legend, Hideo Kojima comes out to talk about his brand new game. Hideo Kojima is one of my favorite video game developers, so I'm super excited to see what he puts out. The game that was presented is Death Stranding Director's Cut, with a cute little nod to Metal Gear Solid. This trailer made me hype. I was one of the few that actually loved Death Stranding, so I can't fucking wait for this. Next up, the master of, Jeff Goldblum announces Jurassic World Evolution 2. Not much was shown in this trailer except for some very beautiful visuals. I can't wait to see what this game has to offer. Next up was a performance by Japanese Breakfast. I've never heard of her, but hearing this performance, damn does she have a beautiful voice. Along with it, a trailer for what looks like a cel-shaded version of Journey, and isn't Journey already cel-shaded? Called Sable. This game looks very serene, just like Journey does. I'm probably not going to play it, but I can definitely appreciate it. Next up, they showed off a trailer for an isometric action RPG called Lost Ark. It reminded me a lot of an isometric Final Fantasy game. Just like the last game, it looks really nice and fun, but I doubt that I'll pick it up to play it. After a quick Amazon Prime gaming shill, we move on to the next trailer. They talked a bit about Call of Duty Cold War Cross Warzone. Thankfully, they didn't talk for too long and just got right to the trailer. The trailer was like watching a Michael Bay movie. Lots of explosions and lots of action, but not a lot of substance. Then again, I've never gotten into Call of Duty. I rescind my previous compliment. They continue talking about a new Call of Duty event happening on the 22nd and 23rd of June. Like, could you imagine that? Constantly shilling an event you're holding out around that time? By the way, I'm doing a marathon race with PITT on June 23rd and 24th for charity, so make sure you check that out. Okay, I'm done. Thankfully, this didn't last too long. Next up is another surprise guest, Deadpool himself, Ryan Reynolds. Good on him for making an Elden Ring joke. I fucking love this man. Marry me, Ryan Reynolds. The trailer Ryan Reynolds is presenting is a movie called Free Guy. A movie about a guy who realizes that he lives in a video game. It looks amazing with some cool cameos like Jacksepticeye. Next up is a new update for Among Us, teasing a new map, new roles, more colors, and achievements. I love how much Among Us is getting love now. It really deserves it, even if there are a lot of cringy memes that come out of it. Among Us! Shuhei Yoshida appears to talk about some new indie games that are coming out. I'm loving the indie game love that has been coming out lately. They showed off a game called Sanctuary, a cute little puzzle game using colors. I'd like to play that one. He also presented a game called Salt and Sacrifice. This game looks like a combination of Castlevania Symphony of the Night monsters with Fran Bo's aesthetics, and it looks so fun. I might pick this one up. Next up is a trailer for Solar Ash. This game looks like a good version of Shadow of the Colossus. This looks so fucking cool. Next up is Chivalry 2. I remember when the first game was really big, and this game looks like much of the same, but better. Of course, they had to do the Spartan kick. I might pick this up and play it with some friends. Next up, we have a new character reveal for Valorant. With this 3-second teaser, it kind of looks like Samuel Hayden from Doom. Peter should be hyped. He loves Valorant. Next up is Escape from Tarkov. Everything they showed in this game kind of just looks like a typical first-person shooter game. I'm not really excited about this one. Next up is 2 Point Campus. I've never really been a fan of management games like these, so 2 Point is not a franchise I like, and the trailer didn't persuade me at all. Oh god. Next up is a trailer for Netflix's event, Geeked Week, where they announced trailers and announcements for the Cuphead cartoon, The Witcher, and a live-action Resident Evil series. Next up is an announcement for a crossover between Smite and Stranger Things, adding characters like Hopper, Eleven, and the Demigorgon. I really need to watch this show. I'm so out of the loop. Next up is a rush of games by a new developer called Prime Matter, which also include a new Payday game. They also teased a new Painkiller game. Whatever that is. Next up is the Anacrusis. This looks like Alien Left 4 Dead, and I'm here for it. Love it. Next up is a quick look at New World, which they claim they will deep dive later. Next up is the new update for Rocket League. In this update, they put in 3 new cars from Fast and Furious 9. I'm really surprised this game is still going. Next up is Vampire the Masquerade Blood Hunt, a new game taking place in the VTM universe. It looks pretty cool, but I have no idea about the lore of this series. Maybe I'll pick it up. Next up is a new horror game, House of Ashes, a game where you get trapped in the catacombs of Iraq. Looks promising enough, and is that Ashley Tisdale? Next up is a trailer for Tales of Arise. It looks just kind of like a generic JRPG. Nothing too fancy in my opinion. Next up, Sky and the Little Prince will be on the Nintendo Switch. Never heard of these games, but they look pretty neat. Next up is the Planet of Lana. This game gives me mad Limbo vibes if Limbo was actually in color. It looks cool enough. I hope it gets some love. Next up, they start discussing Overwatch 2, a game that I never thought would actually be real. I played Overwatch a little bit when it was popular, but I cannot stand the community, so I can't bring myself to be excited for a second game. Next up is a presentation of Dungeons & Dragons Dark Abyss. Can E3 stop trying to emulate Let's Plays, please? It's never good. The only thing I liked was seeing Hannibal Buress literally not emote at all during this entire thing. Please, don't do this again. Next up is Paladins Cross Genlock, which looks like they just stole assets from Overwatch. No real excitement here. Next up is Monster Hunter Stories 2, Wings of Ruin. It looks fine. Another anime JRPG looking game. Reminds me a lot of the modern Zelda aesthetic. Next up is a performance from Weezer. Along with Weezer's new song, they showed off gameplay for Wave Break, a Wave Racer Tony Hawk-esque game that looks pretty fun. I'm struggling to say anything about these past couple of games because there really is nothing more to say. They just look okay. After the Weezer performance, they show off Endless Dungeons, Sega's version of League of Legends. I'm not a fan of MOBA, so this just looks like a generic game trying to be League of Legends to me. Next up is a live stream announcement for showing off the first hour of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Next up, they start discussing Far Cry 6. I'm never a fan of these moments where they just talk about games like this. I feel like they should just show the trailers instead of just giving us this fluff. E3 is not a place for interviews. Those are for after shows, at least in my opinion. They didn't even show off a trailer, and if you saw my last E3 video, you know that I cannot stand that. Next up, they reveal a new costume for Fall Guys. This new costume being 2B from Nier Automata, and this is literally the funniest shit I've ever seen in my life. Directly after, they showed off a new character for Genshin Impact, which is a game I know nothing about. I am so out of the loop. Next up, they showed off a new developer, Deviation Games. Once again, a lot of talking with nothing to show for it, and I don't mean to disrespect the developers at all, it's not their fault, but I feel like for E3, this is such a waste of time without showing any games. Next up is a performance from the Philharmonic Orchestra in Prague playing the music from Sonic Unleashed. And now, I have cum stains on my pants. Damn it, I have no time to change! I'm so sad. I'm so sad I'm going to be missing the orchestra because of my stream. Wink, wink. Next up is another trailer for Back 4 Blood, and I am just as excited for this game now as I was when it was first revealed. You have no idea how much Left 4 Dead means to me. Next up is an isometric game called Tunic, This looks indie as fuck, and I kinda like it. This looks like the Fox version of Legend of Zelda. Next up is a trailer for Tribes of Midgard, yet another game that I can only say looks okay. There seems to be a lot of that at this time. Next up is Evil Dead the Game, presented by the Spider-Man 2 video game tutorial himself, Bruce Campbell. This game looks amazing as fuck, especially with friends, and I want it like yesterday. It seems like it keeps the same gory ridiculousness the original movies have. Finally, the last trailer of the day is what literally everyone in the chat was waiting for, Elden Ring, a new Souls game that looks like the most action-packed yet. It looks really, really cool, and I've never even played a Souls game. Thank God we don't have to hear about that in every live chat now. With that, the Summer Game Fest ends. Let's see how they did. The Summer Games Fest started out strong. They had some great announcements that made me really, really hype, namely Wonderlands, Death Stranding Director's Cut, and the Evil Dead the Game. I also thought it was really smart that all of the musical performances doubled as background music for other game trailers. Usually, whenever there's a musical performance at E3, it usually takes time away from the game showcases, which is why I usually hate them. But this was a good way to keep both. The only performance that didn't do it was the Sonic one, but it's fucking Sonic the Hedgehog, so it gets a pass. My complaint with this conference, however, is that it started out really strong, and then started to really lose my interest as it went on. A lot of games and trailers they showed off were games that I had no feelings on and didn't really look that hype to me. Towards the end, I was getting bored to tears with nothing really keeping the hype going. There was nothing that made me angry though, so that's a plus. With that in mind, the Summer Game Fest gets a grade of B. Let's see how IGN fares compared to the Summer Game Fest. Alright IGN, let's see if your expo is worth watching or if it has too much water. First up is Mortal Shell: The Virtuous Cycle. The weapons looked cool, but they didn't really show much of anything. Apparently this is a DLC for a game I've never heard of. Next up is Big Rumble Boxing: Creed Champions. This is a DLC that is adding characters from the Rocky franchise such as Adonis Creed, Apollo Creed, Rocky Balboa, Clubber Lang, and Ivan Drago. This is so crazy to me. I love boxing games and I love the Rocky movies. I still gotta see Creed though. Next up is Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1. This is a very cinematic looking game, but the problem is that the trailer had no gameplay. Video game companies, stop making your game trailers like movie trailers. No one appreciates that. I don't even know what kind of game this is. Next up is Survival Machine. This really looks like nothing more than a high-res Minecraft. Next up is Doki Doki Literature Club Plus. Holy shit, I did not expect this at all. The horror that is Doki Doki Literature Club is getting more stories within. Maury and I will definitely be doing a full run of this over on the GCNLP's channel. Bisky will return. Next up is some cringy banter that makes it sound like they're struggling to say anything about the games that they just showed off. Next up is a trailer breakdown for Wonderlands. Unfortunately, this trailer breakdown really didn't talk about anything that you couldn't infer just by watching the trailer, so it felt kinda useless. Next up is a commercial break? Never seen an E3 stream do that before. Well, after that commercial break, they showed off Sifu. This game looks really cool. The way it looks like a modern take on a beat-em-up game. This is one I'm heavily considering buying. Next up is Wild West Dynasty. They showed off an interesting video showing how they created the landscape, starting with the Legos and eventually making it to what you see in the game. There was just one eensy-weensy, teeny-weeny little problem. They forgot to show the actual game. Next up is Ali Ali World. This world looks amazing, and the gameplay looks like a fast-paced skateboard-based platformer. This looks like so much fun, and I really want to play it. Next up is World War Z Aftermath. I genuinely cannot tell if this is a first-person shooter or a third-person shooter or a mix of both. The gameplay they did show reminded me heavily of Dead Rising 3 and 4. Honestly though, this just kind of looks like a generic zombie game. Next up is Bramble, the Mountain King. This game looks beautiful and terrifying all at the same time. It definitely grabbed my attention. Next up is Skatebird. This looks like Tony Hawk, but with birds. At first I was like, whatever, but then as the trailer went on, I kinda loved it. Up next is another commercial break? Come on. After that, they showed off a game called Unpack. This looks like the most boring game on planet Earth. How is this actually a console release and not just a mobile game? Like, seriously? Next up is 2 Point Campus. They go a bit more in depth about how this game works, but like I said before, I don't really like games like these, so I'm not interested. Next up is arcade 1-up cabinets for Street Fighter II Champion Edition and Turtles in Time. I might actually get the Turtles in Time one. That game is really fun. Next up is The Forgotten City, a time-traveling game that has multiple pathways. Is it just me, or does the guy that greets you every time look like Frank from House Party? Next up is Disciples Liberation. This game kind of looks like Diablo, but I don't know. I'm not that interested. Next up is more information on Tunic. This time they go way more in depth on how the game works, and honestly, it sold me. A challenging Zelda-type game? I'm down to try that. Next up is another look at the Smite and Stranger Things crossover. They really didn't go past anything they already showed, so there really is nothing to talk about here. Next up is Splitgate, a game that looks like they're combining Overwatch and Portal. This idea is genius, and I can really see it catching on, and it's free to play. Neat. Next up is Streets of Rage 4, Mr. X's Nightmare. Just kinda looks like a normal beat 'em up, nothing too special about it. Next up is Court Keeper. This game looks like Minecraft mixed with Don't Starve. It looks cool, but it's not my kind of game. Next up is Inculinati. I really don't know what this is. RPG? Puzzle game? Either way, it doesn't look all too interesting. Next up is Audio Clash Battle of the Bands, a rhythm game with living Tombstone music. This background music, by the way, is definitely the FNAF song. I'd know that beat anywhere. I want this game so bad. The Living Tombstone is one of my favorite electronic music bands out there. Next up is another commercial break? That's 3 now! Come on, IGN, we get it, you make videos. Next up is Blacktail, a game where you play as a witch with a magic bow. I can't really say this did anything for me. Next up is Death's Gambit Afterlife. This game looks awesome. How come no one told me about this game? Next up is Black Skylands. The animated portion of this trailer looked awesome, but the game itself kinda looks meh. Next up is Steel Rising. They really didn't show anything in this trailer that I can talk about, so we'll just move on. Next up is Unbound World Apart. Despite being such a short trailer, it really showed a lot. It reminded me of modern 2D platformers like Ori or Dust and Elysian Tale. Next up is Broken Pieces. I get some Silent Hill and Alan Wake vibes out of this game. It looks really interesting. Next up is Martha is Dead. Once again, another movie-esque trailer. The only gameplay that was shown just showed the characters walking through environments. That barely counts. Next up is Haunted Space, a Star Fox-esque shooter with giant space monsters. That's genius! Next up is Chernobylite, a first-person shooter horror game where you sneak into a government facility. It looks pretty interesting, but nothing more than that, really. With that, the IGN Expo comes to a close. Let's get to the grading. The IGN Expo was solid. What it lacked in hype, it made up for in its consistency. Even though the only game I was really excited over was Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, the rest of the games looked really interesting. I could have done without the cringy banter and the 3 commercial breaks. There was no point where I could say I was bored though. With that in mind, the IGN Expo gets my grade of B+. That concludes the E3 pre-shows. Now to get into the juicy stuff. Let's see how Ubisoft kicks off E3. Ready for another year without Rayman? Let's see what they decide to show off. First up is Rainbow Six Extraction. Through the cinematic trailer they showed, I just have one question. Has Rainbow Six ever had supernatural elements before? I've never seen fucking demons in Rainbow Six. They described the gameplay in a bit more detail, describing it as a co-op first-person shooter game. It reminds me a lot of what Zombie U was, and that game was awesome, so I may pick this one up if it's anything like that. They continue on to go through an entire gameplay breakdown, and watching this, I can see now that it is way more like Left 4 Dead than it is Zombie U. Different demon enemy types, getting to safe rooms where you can refill. A lot of companies seem to want to try their hands at their own Left 4 Dead. Where this game creates an interesting twist, however, is that it offers you objectives that you can fulfill to get more intel for your team, at the risk of making your trip to the safe room a bit longer. I think that's very cool and looks like a ton of fun. Next up is Rocksmith Plus. From the way the initial trailer makes it look, this is a very interesting concept. Essentially using Guitar Hero with an actual guitar to teach you how to play. Next up is Riders Republic, an MMO sports game where you can compete in multiple different events such as mountain biking, snowboarding, and everyone's favorite sport, jetpacking. This game actually looks really fun and looks like something I'd be super into when I was younger, back in the days of playing ATV Off-Road Fury. There's also an exploration element, so that's a plus. Next up is updates about Rainbow Six Siege. Not much to say other than that they're implementing crossplay and they're adding a new character. I don't really know anything about Rainbow Six games, so I don't know if that animated trailer had any lore I would be familiar with otherwise, but I'm just gonna move on. Next up, they rushed through a bunch of updates in existing games, some notable ones being Brawlhalla adding the Ninja Turtles and Aiden Pierce returning to Watch Dogs. Next up is Just Dance 2022. They just announced it was going to be a thing. No show, no gameplay, just Todrick Hall talking about how his song is getting a customized version in this game. I don't even know who this guy is or what song he's talking about. I don't know if that's because it's a weird choice or because I'm just old and out of the loop. Probably that one, but I really didn't care. Last time they had this whole ass performance playing Skibbity with a giant stage performance. This just has this dude shilling his song. Kinda lame. I can't speak. Last time they had a whole ass performance playing Skibbity with a giant stage performance. This just had some dude shilling his song. Kinda lame. Next up is some updates on Assassin's Creed Valhalla. After congratulating themselves and the player base for a few minutes, they announced that there will be a few bug fixes, added weapons, and some quality of life changes added to the game based off of community feedback. They also announced a new DLC coming out this summer called The Siege of Paris. Lastly, they also announced that Assassin's Creed Valhalla will go into its second year, still being supported with DLC and updates well after its release. The first time ever for an Assassin's Creed game. Next up is a small trailer for Season 2 of Mythic Quest, the comedy series starring Mac from Always Sunny. I remember the show being announced at one of the E3s I covered and was really excited for it, then never watched it because honestly, I didn't even know it came out. Next up is a trailer for a movie called Werewolves Within. They claim that no one has heard of this game, but I've heard of this game. And if you're wondering what it is, it's just the card game Werewolf, but in VR form. That's really all it is. And that's what it seems like this movie is. A movie version of the game Werewolf, trying to figure out who the werewolf is. My bets are on the doctor they showed being super paranoid about it. Next up is way more info on Far Cry 6. After finally seeing a trailer for the game, I could see what they meant that the villain Anton Castillo is very terrifying. This man commands such a presence that he is nothing but intimidating. I was definitely compelled. No gameplay still, so that's a big old negative. They also showed off a DLC that was coming out called Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, where you play as past Far Cry villains, which is an interesting idea since they seem like they're really playing into Far Cry being about the villains. Next up is something that was very, very unexpected. Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. I did not expect Mario plus Rabbids to get a sequel, but honestly, I'm here for it. Especially with the gameplay that they showed, they're expanding upon the formula immensely. The sparks are not as terrifying as I thought they'd be, combining Lumas and Rabbids. I'm really looking forward to this game and seeing what cosmic horrors Cursa has to offer. Mario and Rabbids crossed over, so when does Rayman get thrown into that mix? Rabbids are technically Rayman characters. Next up, the CEO of Ubisoft comes on screen to thank all of the development teams, the players, briefly mention how tough 2020 was, all the usual company spiel. Whatever, just get to the game. Afterwards, they show off their final trailer with Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. Avatar really is the next Star Wars, isn't it? Getting countless sequels, spin-offs, and games. The only thing I know about Avatar is the Flights of Passage ride at Disney World, which is the best ride in Disney, by the way. I've not seen the movie, so I'm not really familiar with this world, but it looks nice. For a trailer they were really excited to show, they sure as hell forgot to show any glimpse of what the game is. Come on guys, you gotta know by now that no matter how good a video game trailer is, no one will take it seriously unless gameplay is shown. People say it every year and companies just don't listen. Then they show an ad for Ubisoft Plus, Ubisoft's gaming service, and I've already explained my distaste for streaming services for both TV shows and video games, so I don't really have to say how much I hate this. With that, the Ubisoft Forward comes to an end. Let's see how they did. It was very clear from the get-go that Ubisoft did not have a lot of stuff to show off. That's why all of their presentations were very long. The first segment on Rainbow Six Extraction was literally the first fifth of the entire presentation. What I do have to appreciate about this, however, is that because they went into so much detail, there were less games that I feel iffy on. A lot of the games they presented looked very interesting and fun. The only game I was truly hyped for was Mario and Rabbids, but that's mostly because I'm not familiar with Far Cry or Rainbow Six, but I know those series are big enough for that to garner a lot of hype. The banter was minimal, just a quick blurb about what's coming next in the conference and then just letting that game and developers speak for themselves. It was very concise that way. I do have to deduct points because a lot of the announcements they made in this presentation were just updates to already existing games. Also, no Rayman. With all that in mind, I give Ubisoft Forward a grade of B+. Did about the same for me as the IGN Expo, but we still have a lot to get through, so let's see what Gearbox has to show off. I was very surprised to see that Gearbox was getting their own showcase this year. I almost skipped it by accident. Whoopsie. Let's see what they have going on. The first 10 minutes of the conference are focused on talking about some behind-the-scenes stuff with the Borderlands movie. From the stuff they were saying, it sounded pretty cool. Is that Jack Black as Claptrap? Try saying that 3 times fast. This segment did feel like it went on forever though, because Randy Pitchford can't make a single statement without stuttering. Next up, with a very short announcement trailer, was Homeworld 3, a new RTS game in the Homeworld franchise. Never heard of it. Next up is the same exact trailer as before for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. The developer comes on to talk about it, but it's nothing we can't already discern from the trailers. Just like before. No new info is added. My hype for this game is slowly disintegrating because I'm just seeing the same thing over and over and over again. Next up, they advertise for Homeworld 3 again. We literally just saw this. Why? Next up, hopefully something new. Nope. They show off Tribes of Midgard again, this time with a more comprehensive trailer than before. This game looks good enough, just not something that I'm particularly interested in. Next up, they announced a new DLC for Godfall called Fire and Darkness. This game looks really fun to play. I may pick it up to check out what it has to offer. Next up is Homeworld 3, go away! I get it, you're coming out! We go back to Randy Pitchford talking with Kevin Hart, who is playing Roland in the Borderlands movie, essentially spewing all the same spiel that everyone else was saying about this movie, so that added nothing to the presentation. With that, the Gearbox presentation is over. Let's rate this baby. Right off the bat, I was debating on not even rating this one after I watched it, mostly because it was such a nothing conference. Going in, I was wondering what Gearbox was even going to showcase, since they're not a company like Bethesda or Square Enix that are always working on like a million games at once. They work slower. Going in, they mostly talked about the movie, which was interesting to listen to, but was definitely focused on a bit too much. I wasn't hype about any of the other games they announced, and they started to ruin my hype for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands because it was literally the same trailer that was played at the beginning of the Summer Game Fest, but just again. Also, why would you advertise for Homeworld 3 3 times? They were all like 5-second trailers, so why bother splitting them up? With all that in mind, I give the Gearbox Showcase a grade of a D. There was nothing in here that made me actively angry or upset, but I just really don't see the reason why this showcase needed to exist. Let's see how Xbox and Bethesda's Showcase fares against Gearbox. We all know my thoughts on Bethesda, but hey, at least they combined their stupid useless conference with Xbox's, one that's very consistent. Let's see how they rank up. First, we gotta say our obligatory hellos to Todd Howard. The first game we take a look at is Starfield. Once again, stop treating video game trailers like movie trailers. It's becoming a plague on this year's E3, I'm noticing. Like, cool, there's a story, but what's a video game story without fun gameplay to go along with it? Next up, we look at Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. This trailer was so slow, boring, and just looked like another run-of-the-mill FPS game. This trailer was literally putting me to sleep. This was a bad trailer all around. Next up, we look at another trailer for Back 4 Blood. Love to see E3 has never changed, giving us the same trailers over and over again. Kingdom Hearts 3. Next up is Contraband. This trailer actually made me mad. What am I supposed to get out of this trailer? This trailer gives me no information about the game's world, gameplay style, or anything other than that it's a co-op open world game. This is a trailer. The thing that's supposed to get me excited about your new game, and then you decide not to show me anything? Bad trailer. Next up is Sea of Thieves: A Pirate's Life, a free DLC for Sea of Thieves that adds characters from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. It's really weird seeing Jack Sparrow put in something pirates related considering the whole controversy happening between Disney and Johnny Depp, but it's cool to see some pirates love in this game. Next up, they announced the entire Yakuza saga and Yakuza Like a Dragon will be released on Xbox systems. I've been hearing nothing but praise for the Yakuza games recently, and watching this trailer, I just have to ask, what the fuck even are these games? I really need to get around to playing them. Next up is Battlefield 2042. This game looks balls off the walls crazy. Very fast paced with tons of explosions like I'd expect from the Battlefield games. I just can't help but feel that the trailer went on for a bit too long. The next game we look at is 12 Minutes. I remember this being shown off at E3 2019 and being excited for it, and I'm still interested. It's cool to see an all-star cast like James McAvoy and Willem Dafoe involved. The next game, oh man, this is what I've been waiting for. Psychonauts 2 finally has a release date, and it's in 2 months! I cannot wait for this. I've been hype about the game since the Kickstarter was put into existence. I am in love with the first game, and I really want to see the game that Double Fine put their heart and souls into. Next up, they talk about how they're adding more games onto Xbox Game Pass like Doom Eternal, Skyrim, and Fallout 76. God, I hate the Game Pass so much. It's going to kill the video game market. Speaking of the disaster that is Fallout 76, they revealed Fallout 76 Steel Rain, a Civil War type event taking place in the Fallout 76 world. All I saw were a bunch of guys in mech suits, and that's about it. They also showed Fallout 76 Expeditions: The Pit, where I assume you explore a completely decimated Pittsburgh. It's hard to say because, and say it with me now, there was no gameplay. Next up is a trailer for Elder Scrolls Online. Not any DLC, not an update, nope. Just showed off an MMORPG that has been around for 7 years. Alright, Bethesda. Next up is Party Animals, which just looks like a furry version of Gang Beasts. The gameplay looks no different from Gang Beasts, so I think I'd rather just play Gang Beasts. Next up, they announced an Xbox Series X release of Hades. This is another game I need to get around to. Next up is Somerville, a cinematic platformer that gives me vibes like Heart of Darkness, Out of This World, or Oddworld. Next up is Halo Infinite and Halo Infinite's multiplayer. The story trailer was very compelling, especially the part with Master Chief and Futaba Cortana. The glimpses of gameplay from the game, however, came with the multiplayer trailer, and oh man, does this game look cool. Every game is made better when a grappling hook is involved. Next up is Diablo 2 Resurrected. A lot of this trailer was just the characters standing in one spot just stabbing a giant monster while getting burned, so sorry, can't say I'm very excited for this one. Next is A Plague Tale Requiem. There was no gameplay again. If you don't have any gameplay to show off, then that means your game isn't ready to be revealed yet, especially at E3. Next up is yet another look at Far Cry 6. At least we got gameplay this time instead of just a cutscene or talking like the other times. I just hate when they spread a game out so far in E3. The same thing happened with Kingdom Hearts 3 back in 2019. I know it's a big game, but just keep it to one conference. Next up is Slime Rancher 2. This was a nice refreshing breath of fresh air. This trailer was all gameplay, no cinematics whatsoever, just showed the game, let the game speak for itself, and then the trailer was over. The game looks like it's the same as the last game, but expanded upon, which is good. Next up is Shredders. This trailer was boring, and I couldn't tell whether or not it showed any gameplay at all. My gut says that they didn't, and we just watched a really boring looking animation of a dude snoreboarding. Snoreboarding? That's fitting. I'm keeping that in. Next up is Atomic Heart, a very weird looking first person shooter game where you can control time and electricity? I feel like at this point we're getting very oversaturated with shooter games. Next up is Replaced. This game looks fucking gorgeous. Pixel art with 3D backgrounds with this beautiful lighting nearly blew my mind. The gameplay and art style really remind me of Out of This World, and I love it so much. Next up is the Shroom and Doom update to a game called Grounded. I've never heard of this game before, but it looks interesting enough. I'm just confused on what kind of game it is. Is it like Sims, or is it different? I don't know. They added sitting though. That's a feature that needed to be added, I guess. Next up is an announcement for a big update coming to Among Us. I couldn't really discern anything from this trailer that wasn't already in the base game, so I don't really know what to say about it. Next up is Eiyuden Chronicle's 100 Heroes. I'm starting to really learn that I love the aesthetic of pixel art characters on a beautiful 3D background. This RPG looks really pretty and I would love to play this. They also showed off they're releasing another game called Eiyuden Chronicles Rising. I don't know if this is an already established series or not, but if it is, I'm looking into it. Next up is a quick trailer for a twin-stick shooter called The Ascent. It looks like your typical twin-stick, nothing too offensive. The trailer really did feel like it went by in 5 seconds though. Next up is Age of Empires 4, another strategy simulation game. Weren't these mobile games? I guess they're seeing a PC release. Maybe I'm just stupid. Next up is The Outer Worlds 2. This trailer was really funny because it poked fun at literally most of the trailers that were in the entirety of E3. All glamour shots, no gameplay. I'll still have to deduct points though because they didn't actually show any gameplay. Next up is an announcement that Microsoft Flight Simulator is going to be put on the Xbox Series X. Once again, this game has been around since last year, so was this really necessary to have a full trailer for? I guess to show that they're releasing a Top Gun expansion? Yay? Next up is Forza Horizon 5. I guess you can drive on volcanoes now. Sure. Honestly though, they go into so much detail for this game and I gotta say, it kinda sold me on how cool this game is. A custom challenge mode where you can make your own challenges with your own rules, a bustling MMO-friendly system, a campaign mode. Sign me up. Phil Spencer then just recaps what we just saw over the past hour to pad out time, I guess, and to really talk up the Xbox Game Pass, the bane of my existence. The last trailer for the presentation is Redfall. Once again, another trailer with no gameplay whatsoever. But hey, at least the characters were charming and cool. After one last recap, that ends the presentation. Let's grade this thing. I'm gonna be frank. This presentation was boring. There were no highlights. There were barely any games that sold me just from watching the trailer. Most of the trailers didn't even have gameplay in them. How am I supposed to be excited for a game if I don't know what the game plays like? I feel like that is a fundamental rule when it comes to making a trailer, is to make the consumer excited for the product itself. Also, I may just be being a nitpicky bastard with this one, but did every trailer have to end with a screen saying play day one with Xbox Game Pass? Like, we get it, you have a streaming service that will destroy the video game market. Just announce it once at the end instead of shoving that screen in my face every 5 minutes. The only game I was hyped for was Psychonauts 2 and was happy when it finally got a release date. With all of that in mind, I have to give Xbox and Bethesda's Game Showcase a grade of C. It was honestly too boring and filled with too many shooters for me to give this a higher grade. Plus, barely any of the trailers had any gameplay. Xbox usually does good, but I guess they just couldn't compete this year. Hopefully Square Enix does better. Let's see what anime RPGs we get this time. The first game they show off is Guardians of the Galaxy. This game looks fucking amazing. Jesus Christ, did they stay on this game for a while though. This game takes up the first 20 minutes of the presentation. 20 minutes. I really do love the way the game looks and plays. It seems like it's taking heavy inspiration from the Mass Effect series, and I couldn't think of a better inspiration when it comes to a Guardians of the Galaxy game. Next up is a quick announcement that they will be releasing Final Fantasy 1 through 6 on Steam and mobile devices. After that, they showed a quick teaser for the upcoming remake of Legend of Mana. They both look nice. I'll probably finally do what I keep saying I'll do and actually play the Final Fantasy games. Next up is some new expansions for the Avengers game, the most notable one being Black Panther War for Wakanda. This expansion will add Black Panther into the game as a playable character, as well as, just like the other expansions, provide extensions to the story of the game. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. Next up, we are getting a slew of mobile game announcements. These announcements are for Hitman Sniper The Shadows, Nier Reincarnation, War of Visions Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, and Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier. Next up, they show off Babylon's Falls, a new action RPG title. This literally looks like every other high fantasy adventure game in the genre. Very unoriginal and uninspired, and literally only has lush, pretty landscapes going for it. The developer commentary added nothing except just saying what every other person says about action games made by Platinum. Next up is Life is Strange Remastered Collection. Call me a grumpy grump, but I really don't see the point in creating full trailers for games that have already been released. I know they updated the graphics since the last version, but it's not that drastic of a change. They also showed off the newest game in the Life is Strange series, Life is Strange True Colors. This game looks very compelling story-wise, using an emotion-based decision-making system to drive the game forward. Very unique, and I really like the idea. Life is Strange is another series I really need to dive into. Next up is a very interesting title, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. From what I know of Final Fantasy, and I could be completely wrong about this, so don't harpoon me too hard in the anus, this seems like a modern Final Fantasy action RPG inspired by the story of the first Final Fantasy game. Also, if I were to take a shot every time they said the word chaos in this trailer, I think I'd actually be able to activate chaos control. After a quick montage that reminded me of some games that they could have talked about, like Final Fantasy VII Remake Intrograde or Final Fantasy XVI, the Guardians of the Galaxy presentation, the Square Enix presentation, comes to an end. Let's get to the grading. Square Enix is a company that usually hits it out of the park when it comes to E3, but this year, they were very lacking. It was very clear that, like Ubisoft, they really didn't have a lot of stuff to show off this year. So they decided to go more in-depth about stuff to pad out the time so that they could get the full hour or so's worth of content. The problem being that unlike Ubisoft, Square Enix didn't evenly distribute the time each game got. This conference was primarily Guardians of the Galaxy, and even though that game looks really fun and amazing to play, it doesn't excuse the fact that it took up 20 minutes of the presentation, time that could have gone to stuff like Final Fantasy XVI. There was nothing I was particularly hyped for other than Guardians of the Galaxy, so, like the Summer Game Fest, it was clear they blew their load too early. With that in mind, Square Enix gets my grade of C+. Damn, E3 is looking to be particularly meh this year. Hopefully the next presentation can bring up my mood. What's next? Alright, how many chairs are we making ads for this year? The PC Gaming Show starts out with an admittedly entertaining skit introducing the show. The banner wasn't too cringy and it didn't last for super long. It was a way more entertaining way to introduce the show than last year when they didn't do, well, anything. The first game we look at is Nautica Blade Point. This game looks like a very interesting samurai take on the battle royale genre. I'd honestly give it a shot. Next up, we got Dodgeball Academia. This game looks amazing. A dodgeball RPG that has an art style that is reminiscent of shows like Craig of the Creek. Side tangent, if you haven't watched Craig of the Creek, I highly recommend it. It's currently the best show on Cartoon Network and I feel like no one talks about it. Next up is more info on Chivalry 2. Still looks fun, just not a ton of new info that I didn't get from the last showing of the game. Next up is Raw Men, a competitive shooter game that is very similar to Splatoon, but uses food instead of ink. Also, that title just sounds wrong. Next up, they talk about Dying Light 2, Stay Human. Once again, they do the same thing that I absolutely cannot stand when it comes to E3 presentations. They just talk about the game and don't show anything. They didn't even show a trailer. Come on, guys, make your appearance worth it. The next game they talk about is Humankind. The game that cooked everybody out of a Sonic announcement at the last Future Games show. Such good memories of drinking the chat's tears. Good times. As for what they show themselves, it's nothing too special. They just show how they create the character models you see in the trailer, which is lame. No one cares about that aspect, they just want to see the game. Then again, the game is just a Civilization ripoff, so how much could they possibly show? Next up is They Always Run. This game is something I can get behind, a cinematic 2D platformer along the lines of Out of This World or Oddworld. I'll play that. Next up, they show off Orcs Must Die 3. From the gameplay they showed off, it looks like a cool hack and slash RTS hybrid, much like Brutal Legend. I might pick this one up if it plays anything like that. Next up is Vampire the Masquerade's Swan Song. Compelling story, making us feel for the vampire, but the only gameplay that they showed was just her walking, which doesn't tell me anything of what the gameplay is like. Next up is Giga Bash, an arena fighter that looks like a mixture between Super Smash Bros. And that old PS2 game War of the Monsters. This looks like the perfect game to pull out at a party. I'd play it if someone else wanted to with me. Next up is Lemnis Gate, yet another competitive shooter game. I'm getting really tired of seeing the first-person shooter genre at E3 right now. Make another type of game, damn it. Next up is Next Space Rebels. This game looks like a money management rocket building simulator. Honestly, this game looks kind of fun. I'm wondering though if the chat function that they show in the game are actually real people or if that's just a storytelling element. I kinda hope it's the latter. Next up is WARTALES. This game is an open world RPG that looks like something very similar to RuneScape. I'm not really that impressed. Next up is Ixion. Another trailer with no gameplay. It just starts with some CEO talking about stuff and then Eggman pisses on the moon. That's really all. Next up is Far Changing Tides. The only thing I can glean from this trailer is that you ride boats. Next up is Lakeburg Legacies. It's a micromanagement game where you control a whole town and the people within it, including who they marry and breed with. Sounds kind of creepy when you put it that way, huh? Next up is Killing Floor 2, Interstellar Insanity. I see you're killing clowns in space and they're trying to rip off Doom with the music I see. Oh, Killing Floor, you never change, do you? Next up, there's an interview with one of the developers for the game that they've been hyping the whole conference, MechWarrior 5. This is how you conduct an interview at E3. It's brief, concise, and riddled with clips of gameplay of the game that they're talking about. This got me legitimately invested in playing the game. It doesn't take much for me. Just convince me that the game is fun, and that's all I'll need to want to try it out. Next up is Silt, another game that looks like it's taking inspiration from Limbo. This one seems interesting in that it's a diver that's stuck in an underwater hellscape, but it seems like you can possess any living creature that lives under the sea. Looks fun. Next up is Hello Neighbor 2. I never got into the first game, even when it was really huge. It just didn't look like a game that would be fun to me. This second game has an interesting logic puzzle in there, I guess, but it didn't really show anything for me to be excited. Next up is the same exact trailer that we've seen before of Jurassic World Evolution 2. I know the developer was talking about it beforehand, but he didn't really add anything of value to it. Next was a supercut of all of New Blood's games, and Jesus Christ, I need to look into their stuff. I've seen the Fate series before and I've loved them, but they seem to like to employ an older PC game aesthetic and I love it so much. I want to know what that one shot was with that girl with an arm coming out of her face. After an honestly hilarious segue where the lead guy on New Blood gets kicked off stage because of Gabe Newell, they advertise for Valve's upcoming event, Steam Next Fest. Next up is Solstice. This game looks amazing, a fluid hack and slasher with different combos and an assist from a ghost and a fairly waifu material main protagonist. Don't judge me. Next up is a showcase of some new hardware that can be used for gaming. I'm just gonna gloss over this since this stuff really just goes over my head. I know you can't tell because of my epic gamer status, but I'm not a PC gamer, so this stuff I'm just not familiar with. The next game we talk about is Warhammer Chaos Gate. just another cinematic trailer that shows no gameplay or tells us anything about it whatsoever. Next up is Pioneer, another generic demon shooty shoot game with nothing really setting it apart from other shooters. Sorry if I sound pessimistic at this point, but there's been so many generic shooters throughout all of E3 that I just can't help but feel bored every time another one pops up on the screen. Next up is EVE Academy, an add-on to EVE Online where you get to decide which career path you would like to take in this MMO. You can either be an industrialist, an explorer, or a soldier of fortune. I can see people invested in this MMO getting excited over this, but I don't think I really know anyone who has even heard of EVE Online, so I don't know. Next up is Lumber Hill. I'm honestly confused on what kind of game this is. The gameplay showed it to be a farming simulator, but also a PvP game? This trailer just confused me, and I'm really not interested enough to look further into it. Next up is Arborea, a fully 3D roguelike game where you fight monsters Dark Souls style and can mutate to make yourself stronger. It looks pretty awesome, not gonna lie. Next up is Tinykin. This game blew me away. I'm really starting to learn that I like 2D characters on a 3D background. This game is Paper Mario meets Pikmin, and it looks fantastic. I'm definitely looking more into this game and picking it up. Next up is another trailer for Chernobylite. Still looks pretty interesting to me. Kinda strange that there's a room decorating aspect to this game, but hey, why not, right? Next up is the Kickstarter trailer for Sacrifier. Holy crap, yes, more. This JRPG game looks amazing. Real-time and turn-based RPG mixture. I really haven't seen that kind of combat since older Final Fantasy titles. If this is more common than I think it is, please don't stab me too hard. I'm not a JRPG fanboy, I'm just a lowly platformer fanboy. Next up is Icarus, another game in the survival genre, yet another video game genre that I just can't get into. Not even stuff like Minecraft, which is made for babies. Do I just not like video games? Next up is Mecha Jammer. There's that aesthetic I love again. This time for an isometric shooter, which looks pretty neato. I don't know what this reminds me of, but it feels mad nostalgic to me. Next up is the Wandering Village. The concept is cool, building a village on the back of a kaiju-style monster that wanders the world. No gameplay was really shown though, but I'm interested to see what this game has to offer. Next up is Death Trash. I am infatuated with this game. The art style, amazing. The sense of humor, hilarious. The general gameplay loop, excuse me for saying something cringe, but it's pretty freaking epic. This is a game that I finally actively want to play as soon as it comes out. Next up is Songs of Conquest. This is the most micromanagiest RPG I think I've ever seen. You micromanage your towns, what your faction wears, where your characters stand, and what weapons and skills they acquire. I can see a lot of RPG fans really enjoying something like this, but for me, my big dumb 2 IQ brain can't comprehend all of this and would probably just pick random stuff to put on everybody. Too complex for this big dummy over here. Next up is Citizen Sleeper, a dice-based management game. Interesting concept that I can see becoming very annoying very quickly. Next up is Project Warlock 2. If this is a sequel, I need to play the first game. This game looks very classic Doom inspired and it looks downright amazing. With that, the PC gaming show comes to an end. Let's get to the review. I need to be honest, I was dreading watching the PC gaming show this year. The last time I watched the PC gaming show, I was bored to tears. So much so that I gave it an F rating. This year, however, they upped their game. They actually made a show out of the PC gaming show. The games that were shown were all unique in their own rights for the most part, and there wasn't too much of a single genre within this one presentation. There's really no game that I'm super hyped for, however, the closest one I can think of is Death Trash. I'm not gonna lie, call me cheesy, but I'm interested to see the continuation of DevBot's story in the next year's PC gaming show. There was really no point in this presentation where I felt bored out of my face or angry that they're advertising something like, I don't know, a chair. It's been 2 years and I'm still not over it. With all of that in mind, I'm giving the PC gaming show a rating of B. A perfectly average show that didn't bore me, but didn't really make me feel the hype that I expect out of E3. Now it's time to move on to the PC gaming show's sister presentation, the Future Game Show. Last time I watched the Future Games Show, I got to watch LEGO fans and Sonic fans get their dreams crushed in real time. I don't think anything will ever beat that, but hey, let's see if they surprise us. We start out with an ad for WD SSDs. Again, this shit goes over my head, so I'm just gonna get right to the true presentation. Looks like this shit is hosted by Blaze the Cat and Espio the Chameleon themselves, Laura Bailey and Troy Baker. First up is Instinction. This is a third-person shooter game where you must fight dinosaurs. For a second, I thought we were finally getting gameplay on the new Jurassic World game, but alas, I was wrong. Next up is Grow, Song of the Evertree. Walking simulator mixed with survival elements? No thanks. Next up, we get more info about Jurassic World Evolution 2. Repeating ourselves again, I see. Can E3 just stop doing this? It kills any hype I get. At least we learned about Triceratops? Cool. Next up is a slew of demos that can be played in a VR version of the E3 showroom, which I guess is a bit extra. The first one they talk about is Trail of Paper, a new 3D platform game that I must admit seems to have a lot of charm. Next they go to Get Packed Fully Loaded. This game looks pretty fun and chaotic to play with friends. Maybe a future GCN LP over on the LP channel. Hint hint. Next up is some quick early access codes for Chernobylite. Cool, I guess. The next game they show off is Gatewalkers, your typical co-op survival game. Meh. Next up is Game Deck. The concept for this game sounds pretty interesting, but nothing really beyond that. Next up is Backbone. I'm a sucker for this aesthetic if you already couldn't tell, and I'm always down for a stealth detective game. Next up is Beacon Pines, a mystery solving game that I wish they showed more of on the gameplay side. I feel like we didn't get a good feel for it. Next up is more Chernobylite codes. After that distraction, there's Trifox, an isometric twin-stick shooter game where you play as a fox fighting hordes of enemies. Meh. Next up is Timberborn, a city builder where you play as and manage beavers. Interesting. Next up is Riftbreaker, another League of Legends lookalike. I understand why they didn't go in depth on these games on the virtual show floor since the demos are available as we speak, but I feel like the descriptions were a bit too brief. Next up is Esports Boxing Club, a game that strives to be the most realistic boxing game to date. They put a bunch of actual boxers in the game too. Punch-Out being one of my favorite video game series of all time, I love me a good boxing game. I remember playing Ready to Rumble boxing all the time as a kid. This one looks really cool and I'd love to play it. Please, for the love of God though, don't put the Paul brothers in his DLC. I really hope I didn't give someone an idea by saying that. Next up is Hell Let Loose. Looks like just another generic army shooter game. Yawn. Next up is Red Solstice 2, Survivors. Just another shooty shoot game with classes and blah blah blah. I'm sorry, but I'm kind of just tuning out whenever I see bullets on the screen at this point. It's all just shooting things and war, and I'm over it. Next up is Lake, a game where you deliver mail. Is this where we are as a video game community? Where all we make are either shooty shoot explosion games or video games based around the most boring of tasks? Delivering mail, unpacking boxes after moving, what's next? Sleeping? Next up is Eldest Souls. Listen, you can't just play your intro cutscene and call it a trailer. That's not how this works. Gameplay? Where is it? Next up is Enlisted, another generic army shooter. Jesus Christ, the developer was putting me to sleep with his commentary. It's literally everything we've seen in every other army shooter that we've played before. There's nothing new or interesting about this game in the slightest. Next up is Severed Steel. Just looks like super hot. It's cool, don't get me wrong, I'm just not that excited. Now it's time for a montage of games like Dice Legacy, Gestalt Steam and Cinder, Iron Corbo Kung Fu Janitor, Definitely Not Fried Chicken Incorporated, Ranch Sim, Shim, Silt, and Dome King Cabbage. What's fucked up is a lot of these games look way more interesting and deserving of an extended spot beyond a montage than most of the games shown off so far. Is that Sonic? Move! I need to see my blue hedgy boy! I'm such a child. Next up is a gameplay showcase for Sonic Colors Ultimate. This game looks miles better than the original. What I'm wondering is they show Sonic was able to get the Drill Wisp at this point, even though they shouldn't be unlocked yet. Does that mean that all of the Wisp power-ups are unlocked from the get-go? No more backtracking to get red rings? That's an amazing quality of life change if that is so. I also want to know what these gold medals are that Sonic is collecting throughout the stage. They make the extra life sound effect, but they're clearly not lives? Maybe we'll find out soon. Next up is Starmancer, the Upteenth management game. Is there really that much of a following for this genre? I honestly don't know. Clearly I'm out of the loop when it comes to popular gaming. There's just so many of these, how is the market not oversaturated? Next up is Kiwi, another game centered around mail, but where you play as kiwi birds. This game honestly looks pretty fun and has a lot of potential for co-op chaos. I love it. That's a future GCN LP. Next up is Death Run TV. This game looks fucking awesome, a twin-stick shooter that gives me vibes of games like Binding of Isaac and Super Smash TV. I love it, and will probably install the demo right after I finish making this video. Next up is Chernobylite. Again. Once again, all this repetition is killing any hype and interest I may have had in this game. Next up is another montage, this time of Team 17 games, including Hell Let Loose, again, Super Magbot, Hoko Life, Honey I Joined a Cult, King of Seas, Greek Memories of Azure, Sheltered 2, and a free update for Overcooked All You Can Eat called Overcooked Birthday Party. Once again, just like the last montage, a lot of the games that were just glossed over here looked way more interesting than anything shown in depth so far. It's kinda sad, honestly. Next up is Harold Halibut. This is a puzzle adventure game, much like something along the lines of what you'd see classic Sierra or LucasArts games make, but in an art style that is inspired by stop motion. This game looks pretty compelling, and I'm interested to look into this one further when more information comes out about it. Next up is Happy Game. Holy shit. This game's aesthetic and creepy narrative is what I live for. I love films like this, I love books like this, and you're damn right that I love games like this. I'm literally playing this game's demo right now to procrastinate working on this video further. Oops. Next up is Minute of Islands, another game that I will obligatorily describe as indie as fuck. Nothing really more to say than that. Next up is another look at Dying Light 2. I think it's pretty cool that they took the time to answer fan questions about the game that were put on Twitter and YouTube comments. My problem is that the answers didn't feel like there was really any substance to them. I feel like I went in knowing the same amount of information about the game that I came out with, you know? Next up is Ollie Ollie World again. This is how you repeat a game announcement at E3. I got so much more information about this game than IGN showed. I know exactly what this game is, how its gameplay works, what the story is like, and how strange it all is. Now I went from kinda wanting this game to really wanting this game. Good job, Ollie Ollie World. Next up is Tales of Iron. I reiterate, you can't just play your intro cutscene and call it a story trailer. That's not how E3 should be working. Next up is yet another montage from a company called Movie Games. This montage includes Lust from Beyond M Edition, Fire Commander, and Winter Survival Simulator. I feel like they went by this one very quickly. If they were only going to show off 3 games, don't you think they would have spent a little bit more time than 3 seconds on each game? Guess good on them for being quick and to the point. Next up is another montage from Xseed. The montage includes Akiba's Trip, Hellbound and Debriefed, Shadowverse Champions Battle, Story of Seasons, Friends of Mineral Town, Rune Factory 4 Special, and Rune Factory 5. Once again, more interesting games in the montages than in the actual show itself. Also, because of this montage, I learned that Story of Seasons and Harvest Moon are the same exact series. So how about that? Next up is Bethesda Lost Haven, an action RPG twin-stick shooter type game. Interesting genre mix, but the game itself doesn't do anything for me. Next up is yet another look at 2 Point Campus. Guys, it's 2 Point Campus. It's not that hype. E3 is treating this game like it's fucking Cyberpunk 2077. It's just a Sims ripoff. Next up is Project Ferocious. Yet another FPS game. Also, this is an FPS game with dinosaurs. Why are we not fighting the dinosaurs? We're just shooting people again. If you're going to have this kind of environment, at least make the game look like those old Jurassic Park arcade games. The next game was described as, what if Doom Guy had a one-night stand with Super Meat Boy? What the fuck does that mean? What the fuck does that mean? The game being referred to is Warcry Challenges. Listen, I know why they described it that way. It's very Doom-esque, but with a lot more platforming elements, but it just looks like Doom Eternal. Like, almost exactly. It looks fun, but it's a blatant ripoff of just Doom Eternal. At least own up to it. Next up is Conway Disappearance at Dahlia View. A mystery game for sure, but still no gameplay. I feel like I'm repeating myself over and over and over again. The last trailer they showed off was a very quick teaser for a game called Immortality, a story about an actress named Marissa Marcel who is a famous actress who starred in 3 movies that were never released. Interesting concept, but it was nothing more than a teaser trailer, so there's really nothing to say about it. With that, the Future Game Showcase comes to an end. Let's get this over with. The Future Game Showcase was miserable. I was constantly checking the timecode at the bottom of the video to see how much of it was left because god damn it was boring. The main problem with the showcase was that I feel like they focused on all of the wrong games. All of the most interesting games to me were shown in the 3 montages that they just glossed over, whereas all of the boring games were the ones that got the spotlight. The only highlights from this that I can grab were the showings of Sonic Colors Ultimate and Happy Game. There were so many repeats in this showcase that it was sickening. Games like Jurassic World Evolution 2, Chernobylite, and 2 Point Campus plagued this showcase. With that in mind, the Future Game Showcase gets a grade of D. The Future Game Showcase was what the PC gaming show was last year. Dull, boring, and had nothing substantial or interesting to show. Who's next? Capcom? Wait, Capcom is getting their own show this year? This I gotta see. Capcom is the developer for so many series that I really love. All of the Mega Man series, the Ace Attorney games, Dead Rising. Let's see what they end up showing off at their very first E3 conference. The first thing they showed was a huge thank you from the Resident Evil 8 Village team for making Resident Evil 8 as big as it is. They also put some confirmation that there will be DLC happening for the game, but they don't have anything to show for that right now. Next, they showed off more of Monster Hunter Stories 2: Wing of Ruin. They reveal more of the story elements and that they call domesticated monsters Monsties. That's dumb. They also reveal that they're adding Palamute from Monster Hunter Rise into the game as an update. They also revealed some expansions and updates from Monster Hunter Rise to put new cosmetics and mechanics in the game, including stuff from Monster Hunter Stories 2. Next, they showed off Grand Ace Attorney Chronicles. I've been waiting so long for this game to finally come over to the States, and it's finally coming soon. Now we just need Ace Attorney Investigations 2 and all the wrongs will be righted. They showed off some new mechanics this game introduced, like Dance of Deduction and Summation Examination. Next, they showed off a bunch of esports announcements. Next. What? That's it? That's all that Capcom had to show off? What was even the point? Well, time to grade. There was nothing new shown at this presentation. Everything that was shown was stuff we already knew about. This was a legitimate waste of time. The only reason this conference doesn't get an F is because I got to see more of Grand Ace Attorney. With that in mind, Capcom gets my grade of F+. Seriously, what even was the point? E3 has been very disappointing this year. Maybe Nintendo can be our savior. Alright, I always have high expectations for Nintendo, so let's see how they do this year. Unfortunately, just like last time, I'm gonna have to direct you to another video if you want to see my thoughts and reactions on the Nintendo E3 Direct specific announcements. Go over to my friend Shay64's channel to see what I think of the Nintendo E3 Direct. Here are some highlights. They're putting in Jin?
No fucking way! Holy shit!
They're putting in Jin?
Kazuya.
Whatever.
Yeah, Jin Kazuya, whatever.
Yeah.
That's fucking
That's
cool!
awesome!
Holy shit!
Oh,
hey, look.
Hey, look, it's Square Enix's conference.
Yeah.
In this
Point
funny,
Campus.
charming, and quirky world of 2 Point County. In the
4
wholesome
times.
management city
Yep.
2 Point
This is the
Campus,
4th time
you'll build and run your
E3 has
very own
shown 2
university
Point
the way
Campus.
you want.
Please stop.
Lots of creative tools.
It's
are at your
not that
disposal to
good.
make the
It
school
doesn't
yours
look
and
that
take your
fun.
educational
Is
empire
2
to
Point
the
even
next
that
level.
big of a fucking
Enrollment
series?
for 2 Point Campus starts.
I've
on
never heard of it
next
until 2 Point Hospital. And that was only because of E3 last year.
Yeah.
Or 2 years ago, whatever, however.
Hey!
Roll.
No fucking way!
Another
No!
Metroid game?
No way!
Please take a look.
Another Metroid
No
game.
fucking way! We're getting a new Metroid? It's Fusion! It's a Fusion! It's a fucking Fusion
Metroid
sequel!
5.
It's a Fusion sequel! That looks fucking awesome.
Well, Mai is
That
freaking
looks
out.
fucking awesome.
Mai is losing her shit right now, I
Yep.
can assure
And we
you.
have a release date!
And it's soon!
Holy shit! Wario!
A certain company.
Wario! Let's go!
Whoa!
Did you miss me? Hey?
Yes.
What do you mean? Who am I? It's a me, Wario. And it's finally ready. A brand new game from my company. Check
Let's
it out.
go.
You
And
can
they're new
control me.
games!
It sounded like Kirby.
Advance Wars?
Oh, Advance Wars?
Oh, that's even better. Well,
Okay.
okay. And she's
Zelda
dead.
dies.
And she's dead.
That's the name of the game. Wasn't it Zelda Breath of the Wild?
Zelda
Except 2
died.
Zelda dies.
Oh, Link dies too.
Oh. This is interesting.
Uh-huh. Without further ado, let's get straight into the grading. Not only did Nintendo do better than any game conference at E3 thus far, it far exceeded them by a degree I didn't think possible. I was hyped for almost every game at this conference, especially Metroid Dread and the new WarioWare. Kazuya in Smash was a perfect addition. I can't even be mad that it's not Crash Bandicoot. With that in mind, Nintendo gets my grade of A+. Plus. It's gonna be hard to follow this conference. Let's see if Bandai Namco could even compare. If I'm gonna be honest, I don't think Bandai Namco could announce anything that would make me hype unless it's Pac-Man World 4. But fuck it, it's the last presentation. Let's see what you got. The first game they show off is another look at House of Ashes, that game with Ashley Tisdale we talked about before in the Summer Game Fest. Doesn't that feel like so long ago now? Remember how I said that interviews should not have a place in E3 because E3 is a place for trailers and announcements? And guess what we gotta sit through? This overblown interview where you hear the same standard talking points over and over and over with this fake-ass reporter asking the questions. Let's just move on to the next game. What? What do you mean there's no next game? They only talked about one game for like 10 minutes. And it wasn't even a game anyone was excited for. They could have done so much with even just talking about Kazuya getting into Smash Brothers. Guess it's fucking grade time. I feel insulted. As a gamer, as a consumer, as a person. I feel insulted by this presentation. Bandai Namco had the audacity to only show off one game in an E3 presentation. This is not okay. This shouldn't be okay. I really thought that nothing could get worse than Capcom's presentation of 3 things that everyone already knew about. But this takes the cake by a long shot. With that in mind, Bandai Namco gets my grade of F-. Minus. Jesus, this was honestly the worst presentation that I've ever seen at E3 ever. That's finally all of the conferences that we're going to be covering, so let's move on to the final grades. Before we give E3 2021 its final grade, let's just recap really quick. The top 11 presentations at E3 2021. Number 11 is Bandai Namco. I've never felt so insulted by a presentation before, and I'm still in disbelief that they had the balls to just show off one unimpressive game. Number 10 is Capcom. They really didn't have anything to show off either. Everything they showed off was stuff that we've known about for months. Tied for number 8 is Gearbox and the Future Game Showcase. Gearbox's presentation had no reason to exist other than to promote their Borderlands movie, and the Future Game Showcase was just full of a bunch of snoozefest games. Number 7 is Xbox and Bethesda. I'm honestly disappointed. Xbox usually has a pretty solid lineup in E3, but they really dropped the ball this year. Number 6 goes to Square Enix. All of the stuff Square showed was cool, it's just they didn't really show anything that people were expecting to see, like Final Fantasy XVI, and they spent way too much time on one game. Tied for number 4 is Summer Game Fest and PC Gaming Show. Though there wasn't too much hype felt at these shows, they made up for it with a pretty consistent lineup of games. Tied for number 2 is Ubisoft and IGN Expo. Maybe not the hypest of conferences, but the way they handled their lineups were very well done and made it worth watching. Once again, the reigning champion of E3 is Nintendo. Pulling together all of the grades that we've collected thus far, that gives E3 2021 the overall rating of C+. This was probably the worst E3 I have ever seen. It is very apparent in this whole event that video game companies were not ready for an E3 this year. I honestly feel like it would have been better if they just waited until next year to do a proper E3. Instead, we just have a sour taste left in our mouths where amazing gaming memories should be. Well everyone, the video is finally over. If you watched it this far, I'd like to say thank you so much. I worked really hard to get this video out when it did, so make sure to like the video, comment your thoughts on E3, and subscribe to Game Controller Network for more content from us. If you want to see even more of us on a consistent basis, go on over to our Let's Play channel GCN LPs to get content Monday through Friday, as well as live streams. Also, please make sure to tune in to our Sonic Generations marathon race that we're doing on June 23rd into the June 24th. We are raising money for the Video Game History Foundation to make sure no video game becomes lost media ever again. So please tune in, donate if you can, and if you can't, then please spread the word. I'm Bottles, and I'll see you in our next adventure.